Hello everybody. Before I go into the topic of today's video, I kind of wanted to re-go over the concept of the channel. I'm getting a lot of messages regarding the blood incantation video, stating that I understand people are going to be defending the band. If you're a fan of the band, it's never good to hear criticism, but I'm not going to make any apology for the things that I've said regarding their compositional skills, but I am going to say that this channel is not meant to be a shitposting channel. I'm not going to go on here and just rail on every band, and I'm also not going to try to come at all the topics from a strictly negative standpoint. There are good things happening in metal. There were better things happening in metal years ago, and that's kind of why I wanted to start this channel, to kind of showcase a lot of the pitfalls that I think are plaguing a lot of the modern bands, and to explain that this isn't a taste-related thing. This is kind of a misunderstanding of how to construct a successful metal song. So that's kind of why I wanted to do this channel in the first place. So I should counterbalance what I've done already and talk about a band that has succeeded in crafting well thought out death metal songs. The one for today is Suffocation, and I wanted to talk about the title track from the Pierce From Within album. It's a classic song. If you're into death metal, you know it. But I wanted to talk about not why I like the song, but why a lot of the different things they're doing in the song are very effective at giving the song its own unique character and carrying a message throughout. I haven't found, I didn't want to just play the audio of the song. I wanted to give a visual representation of it, just so that you can kind of see what is happening on the fretboard of the guitar, to pinpoint the relationships between notes and such. So I found this one guitar playthrough. It's unfortunately not the actual band, but I'm going to use this as a reference. So let's get this started. So that opening riff is very busy and pretty alienating, but if you look at what it's doing as an intro to the song, as an intro to the record, it's establishing relationships between notes right away, even though it seems like it's a lot to take in at once. It's mostly chromatic patterns with some tritones mixed in. The rhythm shifts pretty dramatically between your percussive chugs that they're known for and the 16th note patterns in between. So it kind of is just like a platter of what Suffocation has to offer. They're always going to have those like notey embellishments between the power chords, the palm muted power chords and such. Even though there are some like superfluous elements to what they're doing here, it's a successful intro in that it carries a single kind of melodic sensibility in terms of tone. There's nothing really jumping out of the box that seems like it doesn't fit within the pattern, even though the rhythm changes quite a bit. There's nothing that seems where you hear it and you're like, oh, that doesn't seem to make sense within that arrangement. But going from this part, they go into their verse riff, which is a much simpler pattern, and it's firmly rooted in that chromatic interval that they've already established in this intro. If you look at what he was doing with his fingers, he's moving for the most part for that intro. A lot of the patterns are moving up one fret, moving down one fret, and then carrying your melodic note patterns in between. The remainder of the song kind of stays within that vibe, where a lot of the rhythmic parts of the song are rooted in just that amount of tension that you get between the closest interval that you can make with notes. Well, at least the typical guitar notes, not counting like semitones or anything. They already have a foundation laid out, and this next verse riff is going to simplify what they've done here much more so, where you really kind of lock in to the tension that you get from just bringing a power chord arrangement up a fret and then down a fret repeatedly. It kind of gives like the feeling of an attack and retreat, a repeated attack and retreat, to really get that song to have its own unique sense of tension. So we'll see how they develop. So you can hear right away how they're kind of using that chromatic interval to establish the main theme of the song and to establish that tension that you're going to feel throughout the song. And it's important to note that because they maintain that same interval essentially throughout the song until the very end, when they introduce an interval that's actually 2 frets apart, and it feels, because you're conditioned to this kind of feeling, it ends up really opening up a different emotional layer to the song. And it's stuff like that I think a lot of the modern bands are missing, how you can get the audience to identify a song based on its melodic character and then manipulate it later to give the song an additional coloring. And they're going to do that chromatic interval for this next riff. They're going to introduce it by having the percussion drop out, which I really railed on for the Blood Incantation video. But the difference here is that they're not doing it to piece the song together. They're doing it to establish more of like a dramatic feel to the riff and to introduce it as having an important character. And every time they introduce this next riff later on in the song, they do the same thing where they drop the percussion out, just to make sure that you're aware that this is an important part of the song. If the percussion had maintained from the first riff to this, you still wouldn't have lost the character of the song. You would still have the same flow. You would still have the same kind of melodic sensibility. You're not jumping off the rails by introducing a completely different color and tone. So it's a deliberate thing. It's not because they couldn't figure out how to stitch these parts together. They did it to give the riff that much more punch after the first repetition of it. So if you pay attention to what they're doing with this next riff, it's still a chromatic thing where they're anchoring that root note and then moving it down a fret, moving it back up a fret. But what's interesting here is that they're instead of, whereas the first riff was mainly percussive, not very melodic at all, this one attaches a melody on top of that root note that gives the song more of a melodic development, but is still rooted in that kind of chromatic interval. You'll see what he's playing with his ring finger and his pinky finger are still going to be that 1 fret apart type of interval that has its own melodic coloring, that you'll end up starting to get it just kind of embedded in your head, so that later on when they change that interval in the song, it really feels like they've taken you somewhere. And that's the kind of thing that you really don't see much of with modern songwriting. So have a look at that when he's playing this next riff. Back into the percussive verse part. So, because you're probably conditioned to hearing a certain type of A-B type of arrangement, they go ahead and tease you with that happening potentially in this song and then taking it in a completely different direction. They play that B riff that you are used to hearing after the verse the one time, and then they take it into a new direction. So they know what the audience is conditioned to hear, and they know that you can't really get away with a pop arrangement in a metal song. You have to take the listener somewhere, and that's what this next part's going to allow them to do. So there's quite a few things that might seem superfluous in there, but if you pay attention to what he's playing, you're still getting that chromatic arrangement. You're still getting the tension that you get from that steady increase and decrease of the note patterns. And they didn't want to continue with that second that B part of the verse riff. They wanted to take you somewhere different. And what this does is allow them to maintain that melodic character of that interval, but still change up the song enough where you are having that tonal characteristic maintained, but now you're having a different picking and rhythmic pattern that is presenting a different color of that kind of sound. And they start interspersing some more of that high melody to break up that percussive aspect, and they introduce some more of the pauses in music entirely that they're known for, to get that drama going on in between parts. This whole part is kind of a transition that you don't really, I don't think you're going to hear it again, but it serves to kind of piece together the verse arrangement that you're already conditioned toward and where the song wants to continue to. So if you look at some of the things, it's really fast. It's really hard to identify exactly what he's doing. But prior to that last pause I did, he was playing a lot of the same notes that you hear in the intro, but arranged differently. So the band is trying to tie in a lot of the elements of the song while still maintaining the progression of where a melody can naturally go. You could tell that they're not confining their melody to a 4-beat pattern, an 8-beat pattern. They're letting the melody conclude naturally. So that's why some of these parts seem like they're hard to grab onto, because they're really not isolating themselves to the conventional rhythms that you would hear. But if you looked at what he was doing, it was still mainly chromatic, that one note apart arrangement, and the tritone, the devil's interval. You end up hearing a lot of that in the arrangement to keep the song consistent. So that's like the only straight ahead blast beat section of the song, the only like straight ahead tremolo part, and they deliberately kept that pause beforehand to kind of give this part more importance, give it more drama. If you were to take that pause out, you could have essentially had the song still remain stitched together, but by putting that pause in, this gives this part more punch. Once again, all chromatic. All chromatic again, but the song definitely needed to take this kind of a turn. They needed to develop a stronger sense of rhythm throughout the song to give the song more of a journey for the listener to take. By making it much slower here, especially after the pause, going from probably the fastest part of the song, you're showing the peaks and valleys that can happen in a composition while still maintaining that melodic character that is unique to just this particular song. have a nice tempo slowdown there, and they're going to go right back into the verse riff right now with a solo over the top. This kind of slowdown is just a really nice way to show that you can give your music additional coloring and to give different emotions to the listener. You're not going to hear a whole lot of gradual tempo shifts in modern metal, mainly because they quantize everything and they're recorded to a grid. But doing something like this really gives it an organic feeling. Life doesn't have consistent rhythms, so you end up having stuff like this to really kind of accentuate the parts in between that do have that static, constant barrage of notes and a tempo that you're used to with how the song had played out before. So introducing the solo over this next verse part and taking the speaker of the song out, that's another additional coloring. Sometimes it's hard to rationalize the need for a guitar solo, like why is the solo in the song, what purpose does it serve? You have to ask yourself that if you really want to analyze whether or not the song derails at this point, or whether it actually contributes to giving the song its own importance in that way. A lot of guitar solos nowadays are more about showcasing the fretboard gymnastics and showing the skill that you have. And granted, the solos you're about to hear are very skilled, but they have repeated themes within the solo that have a melodic characteristic where it's not just your typical scale back and forth. If you're gonna take the place of the lyrics, you have to bring something to the table with your solo where that new frequency that you're bringing into the song isn't just there to fill a gap. Like there's a reason why they took the lyrics out of this portion and decided to have that higher frequency come in. It's because they wanted to give the song that much more character through the melodies of the solo, not because they needed to showcase the abilities of the players. So you can listen for that going forward. So underneath the solo, they're doing the A-B part of the verse riff, but backwards, just to kind of change it up a lot, because you've previously have heard that break in percussion and then leading into that same A-B thing by going into a B-A arrangement. You're taking the song to a different conclusion. So it's just another different technique to allow the listener to maintain attached to the composition, but presenting a different path for them to understand the arrangement. So this last riff of the song it's the first part of the song where the root note actually shifts up one note chromatically from where the song had been anchored previously, and it just gives it an entirely different tonal coloring, and the interval that they're alternating in between with the pedal tone into the melody on top is now two notes apart instead of the one. So this part already sounds so much more consonant than the rest of the song. That tension that you're used to from hearing the entirety of the song previously being rooted in that chromatic interval has now been completely altered. So this is also something you're not going to find in a lot of modern metal, where the goal is to barrage the listener with as many different tones at once, while at the same time really limiting themselves because they're sticking to scalar patterns. This is something that they have deliberately left to the end of the song to enact against the rest of the beginning, to showcase that they have more up their sleeve than a single kind of tonal identity. It's a really nice touch, and it provides the song a conclusion that would have not felt as if it had gone into at the end of a journey if they had maintained that single chromatic interval for the entire song. You're at a different destination now, and that's really important. If you want to build a climax, you can't just maintain the same coloring for the whole song. If you do, there's nothing to differentiate your climax from anything that came before it. So that's why this last riff is so effective. So they decide to go back into the intro for one pass of it, and it gives that nice bookend quality. But the difference here is what came before it has now changed how that last melody is going to feel in your head. You've gone from being conditioned to that chromatic interval to now going to that whole tone interval, and then going back to the intro. And the best thing about good metal is how the neighboring riffs of the song impact each other in different ways to give this bookended ending of the song that much more importance. If they had maintained that same vibe throughout the whole song and not had that second to last riff before it, you wouldn't have had that kind of resolution you get from having a conflict come to a climax, and then you're back to where you started with the bookended intro riff. So that's the kind of stuff that's really important, and you don't see a whole lot of it in modern metal. You don't see why riff A affects riff B, and why the two of them together enable riff C. That's the kind of stuff that's sorely missing, and that's why a band like Blood Incantation is going to have that kind of reaction from me, where I'm pinpointing how there is no relationship between the parts that drives the composition as a whole. Whereas this, every single thing that you've heard in this song has been deliberate. They couldn't have cherry-picked riffs from this song and put it anywhere else on the album. All the parts in this song have to belong to this song, and the arrangement has to drive the melody from start to finish the way they did. Otherwise, it falls apart, and they know that going into it. I don't think that much thought is going into modern metal compositions. So that's what we're going to keep discussing moving forward in additional videos. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned. I'll probably go back to finding stuff that you guys are going to be upset about.